foreign policy and external affairs, they emphasize the primacy of geography and external threats in shaping foreign policy. But increasingly, I believe that in recent years, these domestic elements or domestic compulsions are taking center stage. So, sorry. Now, I personally was always under the impression that such matters of state were conducted in the hallowed corridors of power, where statecraft, realpolitik, and national interest defined the external policy of a nation. But Professor Khare, of course, has injected a very interesting element, that of social media. And I think we would look forward to hearing his exposition into the manner in which social media can exert an influence on the formulation of foreign policy. So, sir, I would request if we could start by, if you could very briefly state your hypothesis, what is the book all about, and what's the underlying thesis, and then please explain to us what you mean by social media, what are its types and its tools. Over to you, sir.
Respected discussant, squadron leader Rana Chinna ji, respected delegates from different parts, Minister of Defense, MOD Chair Professor, respected Shishadri Chariji, and young students. It gives me pleasure to interact with you and just give a glance of my book, what we have come out, I have come out with from this book. After 2 years gap of online session, this is first kind of offline session, and which is in Bhopal Literary Festival. I am very happy. 5 years back, I proposed one research topic to the Indian Council for Social Science Research, and I wanted to do the research on how social media is influencing a foreign policy. Most of the research experts and strategic analysts and defense analysts, they were discussing about the foreign policy in a different way. But I thought that let me take a different U-turn, whether foreign policy is influenced from the social media. And for that, I used a very important, pilot study. I have developed 25 question and circulated this questionnaire to around 500 different stakeholders, which are those who are student of political science, international relations, strategic think tanks, different university. And out of that, I received 483 response. And on 25 questions design, which was in consultation with the different strategic experts. And then I developed 4 to 5 important hypotheses for my book. And that first hypothesis I have put before when I started my research. One is that does social media is influencing the foreign policy at all? Because it is so easy for us, but in what context social media is influencing a foreign policy? Second, what are the determinants, factors to influence the foreign policy in the context of social media? Third, whether or how P5 state means the permanent member in Security Council. Those are the, we call it the P5 state, Russia, China, France, UK, and United States of America. How they influence foreign policy through the social media. And I have gone through their Twitter handles of 5 important dignitaries, particularly Home Minister, Finance Minister, President, Prime Minister in the context of India, and then compare how many times they tweeted foreign policy issues by the American government or American heads and their subordinate, and in Indian context, how many times we have tweeted and what was the impact. So this is my beginning, and this research I have completed in 3 years, and when I submitted a report to the ICSSR, then I thought let me convert this important work in a book form, and that's why it's come out the book, Influence of Social Media in Foreign Policy Making.
Thank you. I have a quick question before I actually go on to the list that I had prepared. You know, you just mentioned, you said, and we will talk about the manner in which this works out later, but when the P5 states use social media for exerting influence, this is, could you just clarify, is it purely in an external sense? That is, are they intending to influence the policy of other nations, or is it directed at their own citizens, or is it both?
Particularly any particular P5 state, any stakeholder talks anything which is reflected on foreign policy.
Right.
So whether it is a trade, whether it is a culture issue, or any that is directly related to the foreign policy. So
No, but my question is, when you are utilizing a tool to influence opinion, who is their target audience? If there is a target audience, is there a target audience, or is it is that a derivative thing that, okay, I have put out a post which is providing information that anybody can use it, or is it specifically intended to be used towards a particular influencing operation? That was my question.
No, for target audience to get the response from the student, particularly those who are using the social media and those are the practicing the international relation. These are target audience, and particularly from P5 state, 5 people, particularly foreign minister, defense minister, president, finance minister. So those who are really key factors in shaping the foreign policy. So these are the targets.
I see. Thank you. So, I mean, the reason actually because I was coming at it from a rather different direction, because you see, having had a little military background, in the armed forces, of course, we also understand the utility of information. And being armed forces, they look at information as a tool for, or as an extension of war fighting. So you'll find that all matters dealing with information vis-a-vis as far as the military is concerned, they either talk about PSYOPs, which is psychological operations, or PSYWAR, psychological warfare. Later on that has morphed into information warfare, which the Americans now call MISO, which is military information support operations. But purely in military terms, and forgive me, I have blinkers because I tend to look at everything in life through a military lens. There is an intent when you provide information. There is an aim and an objective behind it. So that was basically the thing that I was why I asked that question. Now there are of course both positive and negative spin-offs. When we engage with social media as a feedback tool, particularly, and that's relevant in terms of, because if you say that social media is something that is going to be influencing something as exalted and as serious as a nation's foreign policy, then how do you evaluate the effectiveness of that feedback loop? And this is particularly true, I think, in nowadays when you have artificial intelligence, and we know that governments around the world are using these PSYOPs via social media and other popular internet platforms to sway both political allegiances and influence elections. We saw that that case come up, when President Trump was elected in the United States, and even in other cases. So, how do we guard against these attempts to undermine our sovereignty? Because if it's happened there, it can happen here. And how do we keep track of these bots, trolls, and other influencers that are now actively working to achieve a desired agenda? And these are acts of war. In the military nowadays, they say that the next war, you will not realize the war has begun when the bombs start falling on your doorsteps. You will not even realize the war has begun, because the first attacks will be cyber attacks. And it will only be when you start looking at your phone and things and you find your screens are blank that you may realize that your nation is actually under attack. So the question that I have is, what are the positive and the negative roles of social media?
When we talked about social media, particularly the young generation, they are using different tools. Take example of Instagram, blogs, microblogging, online collaborations, tagging, then Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Snapchat, and Flickrs. These are the 10 to 11 important tools used by different stakeholders for positive purpose as well as a negative purpose. And this is very, if you consider as a positive change, then you will feel that what are the positive changes. And if you consider it's a negative change, then you have to identify which are the negative. So what I did it that, what are the positive sides of social media? Now that time has gone. The times, due to revolution in science and technology, time and space has reduced. And whatever I now speak, it goes to the global, So the local action become a global reaction. So any attack, take example of German bakery bomb blast in Pune, that was done by local people, local reaction, local people, local action, and global reaction. And within a fraction of minutes, the German bomb blast news goes to the international level. And what is important here, time, speed, and accuracy has happened. And we call it as them a hologrammatic terrorism, where time, speed, and accuracy is very important. And that is a revolution in science and technology, changing the nature of social media. So when you talked about positive, let me just share a few things about the positive, then I'll put it in a negative side of the social media. Take example of positive side of social media, promotion. For example, this the Bhopal Literature Festival. If 10 years back or 20 years back, we could organize the same kind of festival, we could not get that much response from the national level, from globally, because now we are sitting here, but through the Facebook and through the live, every event, while sitting at home, people are getting. So particularly, any event you can promote through the social media, that is one positive side. The public relation, advertising, internal communication among one generation to another generation. Now, 10 years back, hardly any senior person used to WhatsApp, but now everyone is getting. Although earlier, when I asked my teacher, why you are not using WhatsApp, he said, no, I don't want. But same person now asking me how to send the picture, so this is a change. So it is a communication, internal communication through social media, product development, content development, and particularly education sector. COVID-19 taught us, most of the teacher earlier, they were not interested to use the develop content to the online mode and teach in online mode. But now COVID-19 has taught us to how online content is very important. So these are the positive signs of the social media, where you can add the numbers of positive sides. But the other side of social media, which is very impacted on national security issues, and that we need to understand in the context of foreign policy as well as in the context of national security. I said earlier, because the technology is changing very fast, artificial intelligence, data analytics, then carless or driverless car is coming after few years. The entire issue, particularly cyber security and national security, will be changed. So the negative side of social media is cyber bullying. And the cyber bullying is one kind of challenge from not only Indian youth, but the global youth. And through cyber bullying, what is happening now, use of cell phones to chatting, for that, there is a report came that most of the Indian students, they are engaged with this cyber bullying, particular chatting to each other, where they can spend good time on social media for the getting good content on YouTube in an education field. But that is not happening, but that's one negative side. Then addiction. Look at the COVID-19 also taught us that most of the young generation, they addicted to the this new tools. Then trolling, the fake news is one kind of challenge for national security. Through the fake news, I'll give an example. There was a crisis in Bangalore related to Northeast student, and fake news given by someone, the entire Northeast population, the student, those were laborers, they wanted to migrate from Bangalore to Northeast. So this is happening because of the fake news. Then cyber terrorism. The cyber terrorism, people now is talking about what would be a future war. I would take care, means I'm thinking in different way. There are three important theories we need to understand being a student of international relations and strategic study. Why Britishers dominate the globe? Because she dominated the sea power, and when A.T. Man developed the theory called the sea power, who controls sea control the world. Then Mackenzie's heartland theory talks about Eurasia, who controlled the Eurasia, control the world. That was the reason of Second World War. First, we can't find it then. Then Dewey came out and he said, who control the space, control the world. And now, in my assumption, is my just reading, those who control the media, you need not to have use the weapons against your enemy. Control the media, and through the cyber terrorism, you can create or you can make a fear from sitting one place to your enemy, and that is real challenge for national security. And particularly for us, young generation would help in that. But in case in future, China may use the cyber attack against us, then it would be real challenge. And there are different, the money laundering and other issues are covered in that. Then it would be real challenge, and this is a real challenge for the negative sides of social media. And this is automatic. You rightly pointed out that foreign policy basically is based on the domestic issues. And now take example of Tista water crisis. That was only the Bengal state chief minister opposed the Tista water. Then later on that has refused. So these are the domestic compulsion also influence of foreign policy, and particularly in the social media contacts, we need to critically analyze this issue in between lines.
Thank you. That's very interesting. It gives us food for thought, because I think, you see, one of the factors being that social media is a relatively new phenomenon. And for many of us, as you mentioned, your professor, and there'll be many of us in the audience over here as well, for whom media literacy in this new domain, this new sphere, is very, very important, because we still have not developed the filters to be able to differentiate between what is real and what is fake, where people are actively trying to manipulate us. It was earlier in a previous day and age, and once again I keep falling back onto my wearing my military hat. In the military, of course, when you engage in these kind of information warfare in that spectrum, you have what they call white and black propaganda. There are grades and there are differentiations, but the point that I'm making is that today, with this wide prevalence of social media, with with those instruments that all of you are carrying around in your pockets, the mobile phones, the rate of pace of communication is unbelievable. It has never been so effective in the whole of human history. So a lot of people who may be inimical to our national interests can target our population, not just the government, but we are ultimately talking about how popular perceptions, domestic compulsions will influence the formulation of policy. So if I can convince all of you in an underhand manner, and you don't even realize that I am actually acting against your national interests, then that may have a feedback loop vis-a-vis the government and what decisions it's going to take. Now, in your book, you provide an overview of India's foreign policy from 47 to the present, and you go examine at length the various bodies and the mechanisms that exist how is foreign policy decision making done in the country. Now, you mentioned that you did mention in the beginning how you determine in your study what is the influence of social media on the formulation of policy. But could you also please just elaborate on this? Particularly, you made mention of the P5 countries. How do they deal with social media's use and the effect on their foreign policy? Does it affect them? Like, for instance, does the Chinese government care about what its citizens say? Because they have, again, a very different kind of approach towards social media.
Thank you, sir. While talking about foreign policy, most of the population in India, they are not aware what are the core values of the India's foreign policy. And if you ask me, then I'm not able to how I define the core values of the Indian foreign policy. But as per the constitution and the structure of the government, we have different actors who shape the foreign policy, who shape the structure of the foreign policy. And there are the different actors involved in that. For common people, they are not understanding which are the core factors or how they are involved. But there is a structure is available. And through that structure, first is the state actors where government is involved. There is a second is non-state actors, NGOs, IGOs, they are involved. Then sub-state actors are think tanks. So state actors, non-state actors, and sub-state actors, our role is very important to evolving the foreign policy. Second is the ethno-cultural organization. Take example of Commonwealth of Nations, then Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC. Just recently they raised the issue on Kashmir issue. Then League of Arab States. So this is the one ethno-religious cultural organization also play important role. Then economic organization, IMF, World Bank, OECD. Then collective security organization, now everyone is talking about NATO. Then Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Then media, print media, electronic media, and social media. And when you talked about institution, those dealing with the social media, particularly MOE, that's the Minister of External Affairs, then Cabinet Committee on Security, Cabinet Committee on Foreign Policies, PMO Office, National Security Council, National Security Advisory Board, Strategic Policy Group, and Pressure Group and media. So these are the actors behind to framing the foreign policy. So when you talked about social media and influencing foreign policy, you need to get all details of all stakeholders, and that's why India's foreign policy basically, take example of now everyone is talking about why India is taking a neutral state. The foreign policy is nothing but a continuation, and from 1947 to till date it is a continuation. During Cold War period, our position was a non-alignment. Neither we joined with the former Soviet bloc or not we joined the United States of America. And even in a Ukraine crisis, Russia, lot of things happening, but are neutral. So what I'm saying here, when you talked about the actors and the institution involved in a foreign policy, so this is the process. And in this in the context of India's foreign policy, this has happened. Now you rightly pointed out that what is the stand of China. Now Chinese, take example of, although they are controlled, Communist Party of India is controlling their media, Chinese media. But look at the trade war between United States of America and China. D10 countries, democratic 10 countries, including Australia, India, and other things, they ban on Huawei and the Alibaba. So this is the platform they want to, to create a fourth generation, something that. So that kind of media also, they influence the foreign policy. This is a Chinese perception. Then take example of France. In France, Yellow Vest protest has happened. So that is one. Then USA, political pressure on media, particularly Chomsky-Herman propaganda model. And what Chomsky-Herman propaganda model proposed that attempt to demonstrate how money and power are able to filter out of the news. You know, those who has the money and power, they can manage the social media, and that has happened. What you right in 1916 election, Russian intervention. So then UK also BBC, CNN effects and BBC played. The Russians media is the authoritarian regime. And lastly, when you compare with India, ultimately they have a veto power with them. So all 5 peace states, ultimately, whenever things happen, they use the veto power. So this is the dynamics when you talk about the foreign policy, particularly in the context of social media.
Thank you very much. If you permit, I'll ask you one more question and then we'll quickly throw the floor open to the House. You have, I think, very lucidly explained the dark side of social media. So my next question that follows on that is, do we have adequate safeguard mechanisms in place when it comes to social media engagement and analysis at the policy level? And if not, what can be done to make them more secure?
Unfortunately, we have not filter system like a China controls, Russian controls social media. Being a democratic country, it would be difficult for us to monitor individual, But what I proposed in this book that if you develop on the model of Department of State, they created one separate strategic communication department. So on that line, if we proposed, I proposed in that the Indian government should set up an Indian social media strategic communication where government of India can control or filter the news appeared on the YouTube and Facebook or so that's one. So social media, you can create a social media hub. If there is a crisis, sovereignty issue comes, the state and the central government. For central government, there should be one hub, and for state government, there should be one hub. That called a social strategic media hub. And one is the Indian social media strategic communication. Through that, you can control at least those other issues related to terrorist or the non-state actor, which is threat to your internal as well as external security, and ultimately it's threat to the foreign policy. So in that context, India should think about that. Unfortunately, we have very few rules and regulation who deals, with students. They are not aware about that. What would be a punishment? Ultimately, they will get a bail. So they can easily get a bail. But this is the issue when you talk about it. So, but now, country like India, if you want to become as a strategic power or get great power in global security environment, you need to have a long-term strategic vision while setting up this kind of institution.
Thank you. I agree, and I understand that it is a sensitive topic, particularly in democracies. Control of information can be a double-edged sword, and it also can be misused both by the executive. And I do think that what is more important is that there should be mechanisms in place which monitor, let's say, the social media environment to make sure that, internal opinion in a democracy is legitimate. We can agree to disagree, you can have, but if somebody external is directing attacks, which you cannot tell, because I cannot say what is the source of a particular WhatsApp or a message that's coming to me. So those, I think, are definitely areas that perhaps there can be a kind of official intervention or at least monitoring. I'll now throw the floor open to the House. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Ma'am? Yes.
No, it's not a question. It's just a sharing of a concern, especially as Chari Sahab is also here, being from the aviation industry. The concern is, very often we find that the influences which come in from social media is on situations like hijack. Now, when you are showing the parents, you're covering the people, the passengers' families, weeping and putting pressure on the government, then there is, when you have these there's war or whatever, some incidents that took place. Recently, we've done some, the army had taken some action, Uri and other things. Now, can you even ask, the social media is asking, what is your next step? What are you can you be talking about your policies and strategies to social media? So can't there be a zoning off in such cases? Because these very badly influence the psyche of the people who are taking decisions at that point in time. I personally felt that when the hijack took place in Kandahar. And these are little concerns that come to mind. And why should foreign policy, incidents is different. A foreign policy be influenced by social media? Because foreign policy takes in so many dimensions which social media may not be aware of. We come from our own perspectives. So that's just an observation and leaving it with you.
As an equal lay person, I would tend to agree with you. But obviously, at the end of the day, the political executive is elected. And they have to keep one ear to the ground to hear what their constituents are saying. And gee.
No, but then, like some of these attacks we did, like with Uri and other such things, they were kept totally under wrap. And so actions were taken without sharing things with social media. So we can still do things without sharing everything with social media. And maybe there can be filtered communication, which is important for the others.
No, I am, of course, completely against control, because control sometimes completely kills. And a government control can be extremely poisonous and dangerous, and there is no limit to where the control, how deep it can go on our daily communication with near and dear ones, and so if all this expression for social media has gone too far, I agree, but if all these expressions of the people are suppressed in some way, if there's no way of communicating, even on social media and TV you can't communicate, phone you can't communicate, how does it work? What will happen to all that pent-up emotions? It may just kind of completely burst. And government control at any place has to be very sensitively, any intervention has to be very sensitive. In the sense that the moment you put two censor boards or censor board, it starts killing the industry itself. You'll not find Bollywood at all in future, because then if you are writing a script, you are we see it in China and we see it everywhere, where what are the rights of the people, and so it's to my mind it's a very, very dangerous suggestion, and I'd be very careful. Very thin line.
Good evening. My observation, I was in New Zealand on the 15th of March when there was that shooting. I was walking in between the two masjids. I am a Muslim. My daughter was working in a school, and she happened to tell me, I took my phone out of my jeans, which I never carry. She said, "Go home, Mama." And I went home. But here in India, they said that that person who did all the shooting of 53 people, 51 and then 2 died later, he said it was all on media. It was because we are Muslims. But that's not what's happening there. The truth was that New Zealand took better care of me as a visitor and my daughter as a worker. Today she is a PR, but at that time she was just a student. Then any other incident that I've ever been witness to, and I live in India. I mean, I have been abroad, but that was not the case. The 92 and 84 and all the things that happened, what I have seen is very treacherous. But New Zealand controlled, and New Zealand was able to say to everyone, whoever has died, who has got an educational loan, New Zealand government settled it with the bank before the funeral that they paid for. Now that came on social media, that Prime Minister has done so much, but yet what was perceived here, because of that Facebook coverage of that idiot who had that camera on his head or whatever, was treacherous. And people don't know what Jacinda did. Not everybody is meeting me. So social media has a very double-edged sword, and as Meeraji has said very clearly, control, that means regulation, that means suppression. So social media is a really, really very delicate and very powerful weapon. I am for censorship, honestly. Rather than have people make judgments about something that happened in New Zealand that was in favor of Muslims, how much they supported us. They phoned us. Do you have enough food? Do you have trauma? Does anyone ask anybody here? Did anyone ask the Sardarjis who were running in South Extension in 1984? No one. I mean, I come from a mixed family. There is no state and no religion that's not part of my family. I'm very proud of that. But I would like control, because control will help.
Sir.
It was a very interesting discussion. And all the points raised were very valid points. But the question here is, I mean, social media, whether there should be control over social media or no control over social media. And then you pointed out about the control over media as such. Whoever controls the media controls the situation or whatever it is. Actually, all this is ultimately leading to control over the mind. Control over social media, control over media, control over everything else ultimately results in control over mind. The question is who controls your mind is what becomes more important. But we are talking about social media with specific reference to your book, which says influence of social media on India's foreign policy making. So if you consider only that aspect of social media, I think foreign policy making does not depend only on what people think. Foreign policy making or policy making, evolution of a policy depends on a number of factors. Therefore, have you come across any policy decision of the government of India which has been influenced by the social media? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have given 3 important cases how influence social media, particularly in the context of foreign policy. July 18, 2005, we have had agreement 123 nuclear agreement with the US and India, and that was the time, the central government supported by Congress, supported by other allies, and they withdrew, and it was balanced. But the kind of media played important role to support and influence this, the decision makers to go ahead. It would be definitely benefit. So what I'm saying here, there are the few classic examples where through the social media, it has ultimately impacted on foreign policy. And this is one classic example. Look at that. Ultimately, US changed the US domestic law, Atomic Energy Act of 1954, and July 18, 2005. And you know the history. So this is one example. Second is the India-China border dispute. Now, what after Galwan and what is the present, but the local pressures, because of the local pressures, somehow, that is a different story, that we are not stopped the complete trade with China. But to convince the people, government of India banned few tools of the social media from the Chinese, or Chinese company, So that is the second example. And third, India-Pakistan relation after Mumbai attack. Still, you are you are better than me. You can answer that. The track to diplomacy, or other than this, these are the 3 important examples. It directly related how media influence foreign policies. So in that context, I'm not saying through everything is going through the social media. But these are the classic examples which is before us, and we can study. I have gone through the literature, the kind of strategic think tank and strategic experts played important role through the publishing article and supporting to the agreement that has changed the mindset of the people. And that is my conviction. I'm not entirely just focusing on only social media is influencing foreign policy. No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we wind up, I think I'll just use my prerogative as I'm sorry we've run out of time, as the moderator to have the last word. If the ladies will excuse me, normally that is a lady's prerogative. But I personally feel that, in my personal opinion, that control is not the answer, education is. You must educate people, you must not control them. That will then ultimately achieve the. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A great big hand to Professor.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful and inspiring discussion. Now I would like to call Ms. Meera Ishwardas on the stage to present a memento to our author and speaker as a token of love, respect and gratitude combined. The memento consists, a painting is being made by Padma Shri Bhuri Bai, an eminent and a fine piece of art. Now here's the painting. And also a BLF mug to our discussant of the day.